I thought silence was protecting me, I thought staying quiet was the safe choice, but silence makes decisions too, and by the time I noticed, it had already taken everything. I was always good at being quiet, not the kind of quiet that brings peace, but the kind that hides fear, the kind that smiles when something hurts, the kind that nods when the heart wants to shout. My name is Ethan Moore, and for a long time silence felt safer than truth. I worked in an office with glass walls and soft voices. Everyone smiled there, everyone pretended, and I learned early that speaking honestly made people uncomfortable, so I stopped doing it. I told myself it was maturity, I told myself it was strategy, I told myself it was temporary, but years passed, and silence became my language. I stayed quiet when my manager took credit for my work, I stayed quiet when promises were broken, I stayed quiet when meetings ended with decisions I knew were wrong, and every time I swallowed my words I felt smaller, but I also felt safe. Safety became my excuse, safety became my reason. At home it was the same. I lived with Claire Benson. She had eyes that asked questions even when her mouth was silent. She felt when I held something back. She waited for me to open up, and I never did. I said I was tired. I said everything was fine. I said nothing when I should have said everything. Nights passed like that, calm on the surface, heavy underneath. I believed silence protected what I had, my job, my relationship, my calm routine. I believed speaking would break things. But silence was already breaking me, slowly, quietly, without sound. I did not notice at first. Silence does not hurt loudly, it hurts in small moments, in pauses, in thoughts that repeated night. I remember one evening clearly, the office lights were still on, the city outside was breathing, and I sat alone at my desk, staring at an email I never sent. It was honest, it was simple, it was dangerous. I closed it, I went home, I ate dinner, I smiled at Claire, I went to sleep, and something inside me shifted. I did not know it then. But that was the moment silence made its first real choice for me. Silence kept choosing for me long before I noticed. It chose my days, my tone, my future. It spoke for me when I refused to speak for myself. The next weeks felt normal from the outside, meetings, emails, polite laughs, but inside something was growing, a pressure, a weight, like holding breath underwater for too long. My manager Daniel Wright called me into his office one morning, his voice calm, friendly, practiced. He talked about teamwork, about trust, about new responsibilities, and then he mentioned that my project would now be led by someone else, by Mark Lewis, someone who joined the team months after me, someone who barely understood the process. I felt the words hit me slowly, like snow falling before an avalanche. Daniel waited for my reaction. This was the moment, the clear open door. I could explain, I could defend myself, I could simply say the truth, that the project was mine, that I carried it from nothing, that giving it away was wrong. My mouth opened slightly, my heart started to race, and then silence stepped in again. It whispered that speaking would make things awkward, that it could harm my reputation, that calm people get rewarded. So I nodded, I smiled, I said I understood. Daniel looked relieved. The meeting ended, and with it something else ended too. I walked back to my desk feeling hollow. Mark smiled at me later, grateful, excited, unaware. I smiled back. That smile tasted like dust. Days passed, and the office became louder in strange ways. Keyboards clicked, phones rang, people talked. But I felt isolated inside a glass box. Claire noticed it at home. She asked gentle questions, not sharp ones. She never pushed. That made it worse. One evening she said, "You seem far away lately." I laughed softly and said work was busy. She looked at me for a long moment, like she was waiting for me to continue. I did not. Silence filled the room like fog. She nodded, turned back to the kitchen, and I felt a sudden fear, not of losing peace, but of losing her. Silence told me again that honesty could wait, that there would be a better moment, but silence always says that, it always promises later. I started waking up at night, my thoughts repeating the same scenes, the unsent email, the closed mouth, the nodding head. I imagined other versions of myself, versions that spoke, versions that stood firm. Those versions felt distant, almost fictional. One Friday evening Mark presented the project results, my work, my ideas, my structure. Everyone applauded. Daniel praised him, and I clapped too, softly, carefully, like a guest at my own life. Something cracked inside me then, not loudly. No one noticed. Silence does not break like glass, it breaks like bone, slowly, invisibly. And that night when I lay next to Claire, listening to her breathing, I realized a truth that scared me more than conflict ever had. I was disappearing, not because others pushed me away, but because I kept stepping back. Silence was no longer protecting me, it was replacing me. The realization stayed with me like a shadow, quiet but constant. I started noticing how often silence guided my steps, how many small moments it owned. At work I avoided eye contact, avoided conversations that felt too real. I became efficient, reliable, invisible. People liked that version of me, the version that never caused friction, never challenged decisions, never asked uncomfortable questions. But liking is not the same as knowing, and no one really knew me anymore, not even Claire. 1. Sunday morning we sat on the couch with coffee growing cold, sunlight on the walls, the kind of calm scene people imagine as happiness. Claire turned to me and asked a simple question, "Are you happy?" It was not an attack, not a test, just curiosity mixed with care. I felt panic rise in my chest. Happiness is a dangerous question when you live in silence, because the honest answer can change everything. I searched for something safe to say, something smooth, something harmless, and I said I guess so. She nodded slowly, but her eyes did not agree with my words. She said, "I miss you even when you are here." That sentence landed harder than any argument could have. I wanted to explain, to tell her about the pressure, the fear, the feeling of being erased, but the habit was stronger than the desire. Silence wrapped itself around my thoughts and held them still. I said nothing. Claire looked away, and that was new. Usually she waited. This time she stood up, took her cup, and went to the bedroom. The door closed softly, but the sound felt final. Days later she packed a small bag. She said she needed space, not anger, not blame, just distance. I nodded again, that familiar motion, that quiet surrender. She hugged me before leaving, her arms hesitant, like she was hugging a memory. When the door closed behind her, the apartment felt larger and emptier. Silence filled every room, but it no longer felt safe. It felt loud, accusatory. I walked through the apartment touching objects we shared, photos, books, small notes on the fridge, each one a reminder of words I never said. I checked my phone often, hoping for a message, fearing one at the same time. None came. At work things continued as usual. Mark received more praise, Daniel trusted him more, and I faded further into the background. One afternoon I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I looked tired, older, flatter somehow, like a version of myself printed without contrast, and I realized something painful and clear. Silence had not just cost me opportunities, it had cost me connection, it had cost me being seen. I always thought silence avoided loss, but now I saw the truth. Silence does not prevent loss, it delays it, and when it finally arrives, it takes more than you expected. After Claire left, the days lost their shape, mornings blended into evenings, silence followed me everywhere like a second skin. I stopped turning on the radio, I ate simple food, I answered messages with short polite words. People said I looked calm, stable, focused. They had no idea how much noise lived inside that calm. I began to understand something uncomfortable. Silence is not empty, it is full of unspoken sentences, full of paused decisions, full of versions of life that never happen. One evening my sister Julia called me. Her voice was warm and familiar. She asked how things were going. I said fine. She paused, then asked again more slowly, "How are you really?" I almost told her. The truth was right there, ready, heavy, honest, but the old instinct reacted faster. I said work was busy. She sighed softly and changed the topic. After the call I felt a strange anger, not at her, at myself. Even when someone reached out, I kept the door locked. Silence had become automatic, like breathing. At work the pressure increased, mistakes appeared in the project Mark led, small ones at first, then larger. Clients asked questions, deadlines slipped. Daniel grew tense. One afternoon he asked me to help fix the issues, to quietly support Mark from the background. I knew this pattern: do the work, stay unseen, keep peace. I agreed without thinking. Hours passed as I corrected plans I had originally designed, watching my own ideas being rediscovered by someone else. Late at night, alone in the office, I felt something new, not fear, not sadness, but exhaustion, deep and final. I realized I was tired of protecting a life that did not protect me back. Silence had promised safety, but all it delivered was delay, delay of conflict, delay of truth, delay of living. That night I dreamed of standing on a stage with a microphone that did not work. People waited, lights burned hot. My mouth moved but no sound came out. I woke up with my heart racing. The dream stayed with me all day. It felt less like a dream and more like a message, a mirror. I thought about Claire, about the office, about all the small moments that led here, none of them dramatic alone, but together they formed a pattern, a quiet pattern of retreat. I finally admitted something to myself. Silence was not my personality, it was my habit, and habits can be broken. The thought scared me more than staying quiet ever had, because breaking silence meant risk, it meant loss, it meant change, but for the first time I saw another option. Staying silent meant losing myself completely, and that felt like a loss I could no longer accept. The decision did not come with courage, it came with clarity. I was not brave, I was simply done shrinking, done waiting for a perfect moment that never arrives. The next morning I woke up earlier than usual. The city outside was quiet, almost empty. I made coffee and stood by the window, watching the light change. I felt nervous, my hands shook slightly, but underneath the fear there was something steady, a sense of direction. At work I asked Daniel for a meeting. My message was short, neutral, professional. When he replied yes, my chest tightened. Silence tried to step in again, reminding me of everything that could go wrong. But this time I noticed it, I named it, and that made it weaker. In the meeting room Daniel spoke first, about deadlines, about stress, about expectations. I listened, then when there was a pause I spoke. My voice sounded unfamiliar to my own ears, but it was clear. I said the project was originally mine. I explained the structure, the decisions, the work I had done. I said calmly that removing me without discussion was unfair. Daniel looked surprised, not angry, just surprised, like someone hearing a voice they forgot existed. He defended his choice at first, said it was about balance, about leadership. I did not interrupt, I did not raise my voice, I simply continued when he finished. I said silence had made him believe I agreed, but agreement was never given. The room felt heavy, but also honest. For the first time, Daniel leaned back in his chair. He admitted he assumed my silence meant comfort, trust, acceptance. He said he did not realize how much I had invested. That sentence hurt, but it also clarified everything. People do not hear what you never say. The meeting ended without a clear resolution, no apology, no dramatic shift. But something changed. I walked out feeling lighter, not because I won, but because I existed again. Later that day, Mark asked me a question about the project. I answered honestly, and then I added something new. I said we should clarify roles going forward. He looked confused but nodded. I did not explain further. I did not need to. That evening I returned to an empty apartment, but it felt different, quieter in a better way. I sent Claire a message, not long, not emotional, just real. I said I realized how much I hid behind silence, and that I was learning to speak. I did not ask her to come back. I did not push. I just opened a door. When I put the phone down, I felt fear again, but also relief. Silence had made its choice for years. Now I had made one of my own, and whatever followed would at least be real. The days after speaking felt unstable, like walking after a long time in the dark. Every step required attention. Silence still returned often, especially in small moments, but now I noticed it before it settled. At work, Daniel changed his tone, not warmer, but more careful, like he was recalibrating his image of me. Responsibility shifted slowly, not announced, not celebrated, but visible. I was included again, asked for opinions, invited into decisions. It was not justice, but it was movement, and movement mattered. Mark became quieter around me, not hostile, just unsure. I understood that feeling well. Uncertainty grows when roles change. One evening Claire replied to my message. Her response was simple. She said she was glad I was being honest, and that she needed time. I accepted that without argument. Honesty does not guarantee outcomes, it only guarantees clarity. I began speaking in other areas too, small honest sentences. I told my sister Julia that I was not fine. She listened without fixing, without advice, just presence. That alone felt healing. I told myself the truth when I felt tired, when I felt angry, when I felt afraid. Naming feelings did not make them disappear, but it stopped them from controlling me silently. One afternoon Daniel asked me to lead a client call. My instinct was to decline, to stay safe, but I accepted. The call went well, not perfect, but real. Afterward Daniel nodded and said good job. It was a small thing, but it landed deeply, not because of praise, but because it was earned openly, not stolen quietly. At home I rearranged the apartment, moved furniture, removed things that no longer fit. I realized how physical silence had been, how it lived in spaces as much as in words. As I changed my surroundings I felt my thoughts shifting too. Speaking had not fixed everything. I still felt loss, still missed Claire, still feared conflict. But now those feelings had room to breathe. Silence had compressed my life into something small and manageable, but speaking expanded it again, even when it hurt. One night I stood in front of the mirror and practiced saying simple truths out loud. I need this, I do not agree, this matters to me. My voice steadied with each sentence. I smiled at how strange that felt, like learning a new language in adulthood. Silence had shaped my past, but it no longer owned my future, and for the first time in a long while, the quiet around me felt chosen, not forced. With time I learned that speaking does not end silence, it redefines it. There were still quiet moments, but now they rested instead of pressing down. Weeks passed and the world did not collapse. People did not leave in anger. The office did not turn hostile. Some things became uncomfortable. Yes, some conversations felt tense, but discomfort passed. Regret lasts longer. I began to see how others reacted to my voice. Some welcomed it, some resisted it, and that was information I never had before. Claire and I met for coffee one afternoon. Neutral place, neutral tone. She looked familiar and distant at the same time, like a place you once lived in. We talked slowly, carefully. I told her about the meeting with Daniel, about realizing how silence shaped my choices. She listened, truly listened, and then she said something simple. She said I always felt like I was loving a shadow. That sentence hurt, but it was honest, and honesty now felt like respect, not attack. I apologized. Without defending myself, without explaining too much, I said I understood if she could not come back. She nodded, tears in her eyes, and said she needed to see consistency, not promises. We left without resolution, but without illusion, and that felt cleaner than before. At work a new project started. Daniel asked who wanted to lead it. The room was quiet, familiar quiet, the kind I used to hide in. My heart beat faster. I raised my hand, not confidently, but clearly. Daniel nodded, no. Surprised this time, later that day I felt fear again. Leadership brings exposure, exposure invites judgment. Silence whispered that it was not too late to step back, but I let the fear exist without obeying it. Nights became easier, my thoughts still wandered, but they no longer circled the same regrets. I slept deeper, I laughed more freely, even alone. I understood something important then: silence is powerful, but only when chosen. When silence is a response, not a shield. I had spent years confusing avoidance with peace. I thought staying quiet made me kind, mature, easy to live with, but kindness without truth is fragile, it collapses under pressure. Now when I chose silence, it felt different, it felt intentional, like resting after speaking, not hiding before it, and that difference changed everything. Leading the new project exposed parts of me I had kept hidden, not talent, but presence. People looked at me when they spoke, they waited for my response. That attention felt heavy at first, like standing in bright light after years in shadow. Mistakes happened, I made wrong calls, missed details, and each time the old reflex appeared: stay quiet, let it pass. But now I addressed them, I said I was wrong, I corrected course. The world did not punish me for it, instead something unexpected happened. Trust grew, not loud trust, but steady, the kind built from visibility. Daniel treated me differently now, not as someone to manage around, but as someone to engage with. We disagreed openly in meetings, and afterward things still moved forward. Conflict turned out to be survivable, even useful. Claire and I stayed in light contact, short messages, no pressure. I focused on being consistent rather than convincing, on showing rather than explaining. One evening she texted that she noticed a change in my voice, not the words, the tone. That message stayed with me. I realized how silence had shaped not only what I said, but how I existed around others. Quieter shoulders, softer presence, less weight. Now my body felt different, grounded. I began saying no to things that drained me, and yes to things that scared me. Both felt like progress. My sister Julia joked that I sounded taller. I laughed, but understood what she meant. Silence had kept me small to fit into spaces that never asked for less. One night I walked through the city alone, lights reflecting on wet streets, people passing without noticing me, and for the first time anonymity felt peaceful, not lonely, because I knew I was not invisible to myself anymore. I thought about the cost of silence, the years traded for comfort, the relationships thinned by avoidance. I did not feel bitterness, just responsibility. Silence had made a choice. Yes, but I had allowed it. That realization was not cruel, it was freeing, because what is chosen can be unchosen. I could not rewrite the past, but I could speak into the present, and that was enough. The city noise faded as I walked, and the quiet that remained felt earned. The more I spoke, the clearer one truth became: words do not guarantee understanding, but silence guarantees misunderstanding. I watched this play out in small everyday moments: a meeting where I clarified expectations early and avoided weeks of confusion, a conversation where I admitted uncertainty and gained support instead of judgment. Life did not become easier, but it became simpler. Problems stood in the open instead of hiding in the dark. Claire and I met again months later, this time not to decide anything, just to talk. She said she felt safer around me now, not because everything was fixed, but because she knew where I stood. I realized how important that is, knowing where someone stands, even if you do not stand there with them. We did not rush anything. Silence still existed between us sometimes, but it was no longer filled with fear, it was filled with thought. At work the project moved forward, not perfectly, but honestly. When conflict arose I addressed it early, calmly, without drama. People responded to that, some respected it, some struggled with it, and that was fine. Not everyone stays when you stop being convenient. That lesson hurt, but it was clean. I stopped measuring my value by how little space I took, I began measuring it by how real I felt. One evening I found the old unsent email on my laptop, the one I closed months ago. I read it slowly, then deleted it, not because it no longer mattered, but because I no longer needed it. That version of me belonged to a quieter time, a smaller time. Silence still visits me, especially when I am tired, especially when the risk feels high, but now I recognize it. I ask what it is protecting, fear or wisdom. Sometimes silence is right, sometimes it is rest, sometimes it is respect, but it is no longer automatic, it is no longer in control. I am, and that difference changes how every decision feels. I do not speak to win, I speak to exist, I speak to stay aligned with myself, and when I choose quiet now, it feels like choice, not surrender. The cost of silence taught me its value, and its danger, and I carry both lessons forward, carefully, consciously, aware. Looking back, I no longer judge the years of silence as weakness, I see them as unexamined habit, learned slowly, reinforced often. Silence once helped me survive, it kept me safe when I did not know another way, but survival is not the same as living, and one day survival became too small. The most painful lesson was not what silence took from me, but what it convinced me I was protecting: peace that was actually avoidance, stability that was actually stagnation, love that was actually distance. I understand now that silence always makes a choice. When we do not speak, we still decide. We just let fear decide for us. I think of that younger version of myself sitting alone at his desk closing an honest email. I do not feel anger toward him, only compassion. He did the best he could with what he knew, but I wish he had known this, that speaking does not always save relationships, but silence almost always erodes them. That conflict faced early is lighter than regret carried for years. That your voice is not a threat, it is a signal, and those who belong in your life will learn how to hear it, and those who do not were never meant to stay. Today my life is quieter in a different way, fewer unsaid words, fewer internal arguments, fewer rehearsed conversations that never happen. When I am silent now, it is because I am listening, or resting, or choosing patience, not because I am afraid. Silence no longer speaks for me, I speak for myself, and that has cost me things: comfort, approval, familiarity, but it has given me something far more valuable: integrity, alignment, presence. If there is one truth I carry forward, it is this: your voice matters before it is perfect, before it is welcomed, before it is safe, because once you give silence full control, it will choose for you, and its price is always higher than you expect.